All right, so for this video, I'm taking a look at getting going with .NET Aspire and Entity Framework and just kind of seeing how to work those together. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start with a .NET Aspire app here, starter app. We're just going to say, Aspire demo uh, EF, hit that. And we'll go ahead and use the standard settings here. So create, and I'll always make sure that when you're using Aspire, you've got your Docker desktop running. But all right, so let's bring that up here. So you see we've got our standard application here. So we've got our API, we've got our app host, service defaults, our test project, and our web project. This is the stuff that you just kind of get out of the box with .NET Aspire. And we'll go ahead and run that just from the base. So if you're not familiar with Aspire, I recommend you kind of take a look at some introductions videos about Aspire and just kind of getting familiar with what Aspire is and what it offers you. But basically, it makes your developer life a whole lot easier. So you can see here, just out of the box, we've got our Redis cache, we've got our API service, we've got our web front end all running. Um, so everything there, it looks pretty good and it's up and running with no bugs. So we'll go ahead and stop that. So what we want to do first is we want to set up our database to work with this application. And we're going to use Postgres for this demo here. So let's go ahead and go into our app host. Going to add a new Git package here. And we're going to go into and look for aspire.hosting. And then we're going to be looking for PostgreSQL here. This is the project that we're going to add for our Postgres database. Give that a second here. All right, so that's installed. So what we want to do before we go any further here, we just want to go ahead and update all the packages in our solution. So let's hit all our updates. And we'll just update everything to the latest version. And go ahead and do a rebuild just to make sure we don't have any issues there. While it's doing, we're going to open up our program.cs and do our initial configuration. All right, so just to set up our database server here, we're just going to, you can connect to an existing database, or you can, have it spin up automatically in your Postgres or in your Docker local instance. And in this particular case, we're just going to let Docker handle all that. So I'm going to define our database. We're going to do Postgres server equals loader.add Postgres. And we'll give it a name. We'll just call it Postgres. Keep it simple. Then there's a couple of other configurations that we want to do here. So we want to have pgadmin. So we'll say with pgadmin. And we're going to go ahead and set the port for that. Pgadmin. Oops. With host port, and we're going to say, let's do 50/50, I think it's default. We're just going to specify that automatically here. And then what we want to do is we want to keep, there's a couple ways that when it's doing entity framework within an application, there's a couple things that it can do in Aspire and using Docker Desktop to spin up. So you can either have it spin up a new instance every single time, in which case I won't include this. But with this particular instance, we want to keep that existing instance in our Docker desktop from run to run. We're going to say it with data volume. And what that will do is it will say, hey, when the application ends, when it closes down, don't get rid of the Docker instance. Keep that around, keep that data volume, and reuse it the next time. So we'll say is read only false. And the last thing we want to do is add an actual database reference. We'll add database, and we'll call that database, Aspire EF demo, something like that. And that takes care of our configuration in our hosting service. Oh, no, sorry, there's one other thing we have to do. We actually, in our API project, we need to give a reference to that reference. Sometimes it's just a little too helpful here. So Postgres server. And we want to make sure that our database instance has a chance to spin up before we do anything. So we want to do wait for Postgres server. So what that will do, okay, so with reference, basically saying pass in a reference to our Postgres server into our API project. And we want to wait for that instance to spin up before the API project launches. So the wait for says, hey, don't start running the API project until the server is up and running here. So we'll save that and we'll go ahead and run that again. And what you're going to see here is everything spin up. So now you can see here, this is all spinning up. And you can see that the API service waited until our database instance was up and running. And you see the last thing, and this usually takes like 15 or 20 seconds, is for the PG admin page to run. And that's up and running. So now you can see the PG admin is running as well in our Docker instance. And we can see an instance to our Aspire EF demo database. And if we look at the schema, because we haven't defined anything yet, if we look under tables, you can see it's empty. So there's nothing there. Go ahead and shut that down. All right. So the next thing we want to do is go into our API project. And we need to add a couple references here first, or just one reference. So we'll add a dependency to our, to our Postgres code for entity framework. And what that is aspire dot mpg SQL dot entity framework core Postgres. Yeah. We're not doing the Azure version. We're just doing the regular version here. We'll install that. And basically what this will do is this will import the entity framework logic and code that we need in the backend libraries. That's in place. Go ahead and get rid of that. And close that. Close all the stuff down here. Now let's go into our program. So one of the things we can just get rid of the out of the box weather forecast junk. Don't need any of that. Okay, so we'll start with that. So the next thing we want to do is set up our context, our database context. So we're going to set that up actually in a separate project. Let's add a new project to our solution. We'll call it class library. We'll call this Aspire demo ef dot common. And just leave it the default version 9. Okay, so there's a few things we need to do here. Set up our database. So first thing let's do is add our entity framework logic and code. So go into our dependencies, manage our NuGet packages. And we're going to add that same aspire.npg SQL. There we go. I'm going to install that one. And then we also need to add some things to support our entity framework. Let's go entity framework. And what we need are tools. And let's see here. Design, there it is. Okay, so we've got those added. Let's go ahead and add a couple models. Let's add a new folder for our models. And let's just do a couple simple models here. Let's do a person. And let's see the ID. We'll just take this at, our Copilot has suggested some things for us. So we'll go ahead and accept all that. And then add a let's add a student. We'll say student inherits from that. So let's click, and student inherits from person. It'll just give us here some IDs, basic information. Okay, so we've got our student, our person. Close all that. Close all that. Okay, and we can get rid of the default class. So the other thing that we need here is our database context class. So let's add our DB context. So let's say school DB. Now let's actually keep it Spire demo EF context. Okay, we've got that, and what we want to do there is inherit from DB context. And just put in default constructor. And we'll just take that basic stuff here. Sometimes Copilot is helpful, sometimes not so much. So let's go ahead and add our student. Oops. DB set students. I'll just set null. All right, so here is our DB context in the very simplest form here. So what we want to do is do the code first migrations, which is kind of the default way of working with Entity Framework in our applications. So what we want to do here is go down to our Package Manager console, and what we're going to do is set up our migration. So what we want to do is do add migration, and we'll just call this initial setup. And when you're working with these multiple projects, especially with Aspire, you've actually got to pass in the reference to the project that you want the migrations to be put in, and the startup project as well. So we'll say project. We're going to do it into Aspire demo ef.common. And we're going to define the startup project. And we want the startup project to actually be our API project. So we're going to do Aspire demo ef API service. And we'll go ahead and run that. Let's see here, what did I miss? Do a build here just to make sure everything's good. That seems fine. Let's see if it's that. I never remember exactly because there's a certain way you have to do it. Still does not like that. And migration, initial setup project, fire demo ef.common, which is the project it's going into. Fire demo ef.common, startup is API service, which seems right. Let's see here. Do I need to put? I need to put the design. Okay, let's see here. Might be the design needs to go into this project, since that's the actual startup project. Try that. I'll do a clean rebuild here. Okay, try that again. No, it still isn't like that. Okay, so yeah, I stupidly missed a step. So in your API project, you have to add this reference to the DB context in order to get it to build and see the application or to see the database reference. So I added this in. This gives, so this connection name here comes from your app host name here for the database, so Spire EF demo. And then I've got Spire EF demo here for the connection name, and here's a reference to my context. So that sets up the API project to be able to reference the database in Aspire. And you can dig into Aspire's documentation to learn more about how to do that. But that's what that does here. And then down here under the in this is development section here. So I'm setting up this set of code here, which will actually run the migrations. So I went ahead, first I did the run initial setup migration. So we're referencing as the project, I want to put the migrations into my common project. And for the purpose of that migration, I'm setting the startup project as the API project. And the reason is because it gives me this reference to my database context, so it knows what to do with it. So down here, I've added this block of code, and this basically sets up the database instance in there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get a reference to our context from our scope, and then we're going to say make sure the database has been created, and these two lines here will actually run the database migrations. So if we go ahead and build this and run it, and what you'll see now here, let that spin up. Let's say that's done here. Now it's running the API service, and that ran that. And then we'll give this PG admin here just a minute to run. And then I'll show you that the actual migration was run. Okay, it's working now. Go here under databases, our Spire EF1 demo, schemas, and tables. Now you can see we've got our entity framework migrations table and our students table. So our schema has run. Go ahead and stop that. See that? Oops, there was apparently an error there that I didn't pay attention to. All right, so we'll go ahead and let's add another model here. So let's add a teacher's model. And inherit that from person as well. And let's see what Copilot gives us here. Yeah, so it just throws in a few things. And then we'll go back under our context. And we'll add our teacher's DB set. Yep. Save that. And we'll run that one. Oh, whoops. I don't want to run that yet. Got to create the migration first. So let's do this. And we'll call this migration adding teachers. And you can see it's created our migration here. And we've got our teacher table up and down. We're good there. And let's clean up some of the stuff here. And let's go ahead and run that. Okay, students already exist. Oh, sorry. Don't want ensure created because ensure created actually will do the migration steps. It'll look at your DB context and it'll look at the database and say, okay, we need to figure out what's there and what's not there. Let me stop that and restart it without the ensure created. Sorry, ensure. Yeah, there's two different ways that you can approach that. You can do ensure created, which will why is it still saying students already exist? Reaction strategy, migration. Is it not tracking? Let's look at the PGI in here. Let me look at the migrations. Oh, it is not saving the migrations for some reason. All right, let's look at console. Okay, service. Continue running. Okay. Create table if not exists, which it already does. Select. Find migration. The students already exist. But for some reason, it is not saving that update. So just for simplicity's sake, so I'll figure out what's going wrong there later. Go into our Docker, and I can show you this here. So what you can do is you can go into Docker, and if you go under volumes under your Docker desktop, you'll see the data that's created. So if you want to do that, just go ahead and delete those. And then we can go ahead and run here. Okay, through an error of some kind. We'll look at that here. Look at console logs. Failed executing command. All right. Let's see if that's got the schema created or not. Yeah, see, it creates students and teachers. For some reason it is not. Table rows counted 2. That actually puts the migrations in there. Very strange. I don't know. It worked. It did the migrations, but it threw an error trying to do that. So anyway, yeah, there's still, still minor things that happen. So as I was talking about earlier, there's a couple ways. You can do this where you can do the code first migrations, or you can just do the ensure created. Let me show you that. So if we get rid of the migrations here, let's stop that. Let's get rid of our data volumes again. There we go. And if we run this again, with just the ensure created, you can see that it ran without any errors this time. And if we go in and look here, we will see the information there, or the schema has been created. So you can see students and teachers, but you don't see the ND framework migrations table. So what it will do is it'll look at your context. It'll say, okay, I need these tables. It'll create the relationships. It'll do all the stuff that the migrations would do, but it does it by itself with the ensure created. So, I mean, you can use that and it'll work fine. And you don't need to worry about the code first migrations that way. All you have to do is, you update your schema because, if we come in here and we just say, let's add another class, let's just call it course and call this. And let's add some random things here from Copilot. And then if we go into our context and we add our public to set courses, and then we go ahead and run that. And and because we've got it set, so it's saving the schema or saving the saving the data volume, so it doesn't actually get rid of the data volume from run to run. If we come back in here, didn't get enough time. There we go. And if we expand this, we look at the tables. Now you see the problem with the ensure created and keeping the volume from run to run. It'll do it the first time, but when it does ensure created, it says, okay, that already exists, and it won't create. It won't make any changes to the schema. So I'll have to figure out what's going on with the other one. So if you're doing the ensure created approach, there we go. With that, so you just basically need to make sure that you're not combining that with data volume. I'll have to figure out what's going on with the migrations here. Okay, so I'm an idiot. I know what I did. So ensure migration, yeah, the first time it runs, and that's why it was throwing the error the one time. Ensure migration, the first time it runs, checks to make sure the database is there and it adds that any framework table. It was throwing that one error the last time I ran it because I had cleared out the data volume and the table for. I can show you here if I look at the console. So it's doing this EF migration ID. Well, at this point when it runs, because it's running first thing, it actually hadn't even created that table yet. So that's why it threw that error when it ran that. But so actually I don't know what I was thinking. I had that backwards. So you want the ensure created. Yeah, you need to have that there the first time. Actually, you don't need that there the first time. So you do one or the other. So if you're doing it this way with migrations, do that. Otherwise, do the ensure created and don't keep the data volume from run to run. So that's what it is. So it's a case of brain fart here. But I added another table for schools, and if I look at the PG admin here and pull up my schema, and you can see now we've got courses, schools, students, teachers, and my migration history table here. So if I count the rows, you can see there's 4 rows because there are 4 migrations, and those all 4 ran. Right, so that's basically how you get started with doing migrations. You can put the data model and context in its own project and class library and do the migrations there. You just have to remember when you're doing it that you need to, when you're running these add migrations, you need to include your project reference to the project that has that in, and then the startup project will be your API project. Because by default, the app host doesn't know anything about how to do entity framework. You didn't add entity framework to the app host, so you can't do your add migration using that as the startup project. So the way that you do it with Aspire is that you use the API service or some of the project, excuse me, that has the entity framework class libraries added to it. Um, there are there's another way you can put like create a worker service as well. If you I've seen that where somebody's created a worker service project and use that to run the migrations. And if you're doing that, then basically what you need to do is you add a reference to the worker service in your app host, and then you have that running the migration uh, process instead of running it from your API. So this block of code here where you get your scope and you run your execution, create your execution strategy, and you can do the migrations. You would do that from the worker service instead of doing it from your API project. API service is fine. It can do it here just as easily. Um, and I guess it kind of depends on how you want to deploy to production after after it's all said and done. Because this really only helps you getting set up in your local environment and development. When you start deploying it onto servers, be it QA server or production server, you have to kind of take a different approach to that and handle that as well. Although you can do the migrations. I in your production deployments as part of that. I'm not a fan of doing it that way. Um, I'm more one of those who likes to do the production database migration separately, and then and then just deploy your context and all that with it. You can do it either way, and it works just fine. It's just a matter of how you want to approach the deployments of the changes to your code. It used to be that Entity Framework was a lot less reliable in doing those migrations in your production environments on your server environments, but it's gotten a lot better and it works pretty well now. So you don't really have to worry about that as much. And I probably need to revisit my approach to it as well a little bit and come to rely more on the code first migrations in my production deployment and production environments as well. So that's it. That's just getting started, and the approach is basically the same for any data source that you're doing, whether it's a SQL Server or Postgres or MySQL or any other ones. The approach is the same. You just use the entity framework libraries that are specific for that data source, and everything else is pretty much the same. So that's all there is to it. So thank you.